The last vestiges of the afternoon sun have softened to a deep, muted gold. You feel the coolness settling into your bones now that the intense heat of the day has retreated. Your limbs feel weighted with the accumulated effort of routine. Standing at the well, bending over the hearth, carrying baskets, and working with natural pigments. Everything in the dwelling seems settled now, resting under a blanket of cooling dusk air. You find yourself drawn to the edge of your small yard, where the rough stone floor meets the packed earth of the path. It is here that the day's work gradually gives way to a slower state of being. The air carries distinct smells, the faint tang of damp wood smoke mixing with the sharper, clean scent of cooling dung and animal bedding from the nearby stalls. You pause, simply letting the scents wash over you, cataloging them without judgment or complaint. These are the smells of necessity, the smell of life lived close to the ground. You notice how the light itself has changed its character. It is no longer the sharp, demanding glare of midday, but something diffused and forgiving, like milk spread thinly across the sky. You look at the quality of the shadows stretching away from the eaves and against the uneven walls. They are long and soft now, lacking the crisp definition they held hours ago. This softening light seems to coax a deeper stillness out of everything around you. The weight of your tools feels comforting in your hands. The rough handle of the dyeing brush, the notched edge of the wooden scraper, the cool ceramic lip of the pot. Each object speaks of use and endurance. They have not been polished by modern implements. Their curves and surfaces are worn smooth by generations of repeated handling. You trace these imperfections with a fingertip, feeling the subtle variations in texture. A patch of grit here, a sliver of hardened grease there. It is remarkable how much history settles into common things. You move slowly toward the small collection of kindling you gathered earlier. The wood is damp but not sodden, smelling deeply of bark and forest floor mold. You lift one piece, noting its surprising weight for its size. It feels like a record of the tree it once was, the life it drew up from deep soil, stored in its fibrous core. There is a faint sound now, a murmuring background noise that was absent during the peak activity of morning errands. It is the collective breathing of the neighborhood, a slow exhalation as people finally settle into their homes for the evening. You can hear the sporadic clinking of buckets being moved inside and the soft creak of wooden shutters closing against the gathering dark. You find a spot near the wall where the cooler air gathers, allowing you to simply rest your hand and observe the interplay of light and shadow upon the stone surface. The stone absorbs the day's heat gradually, releasing it slowly into the cooling evening. You notice the subtle patterns etched into the surface, the places where water has run over it year after year, creating almost invisible linear streaks. The rhythm of life here is dictated not by clocks or sudden appointments, but by the slow cycles of natural light and the practical demands of sustenance. Your thoughts begin to cycle with this slower tempo. You consider the necessity of everything you have done today, the meticulous measurement of pigments, the hauling of water that tasted faintly of clay, the simple act of kneading grain into solid form. Each action was necessary, yet it is the sheer repetition of these actions that defines your existence. The physical reality of your environment reinforces this sense of deep continuity. The very architecture seems to resist change. The thick walls were built from local earth and stone, designed to regulate temperature slowly, keeping the day's heat out and the night's chill out. When you run your hand along the textured surface of a neighboring wall, you are touching centuries of accumulated existence, the residue of countless lives who performed the same motions on this exact spot. You find yourself reflecting on time itself, not as a swift arrow flying from one moment to the next, but perhaps more like the slow, consistent drip of water into an empty basin. Each drop is distinct, yet contributes relentlessly to a massive, inevitable accumulation. The work is constant, and with that constancy comes a strange kind of peace. The scent shifts slightly as the evening truly descends. Wood smoke begins to mix with the smell of cooking, the rich, earthy aroma of stews simmering in earthenware pots, mingled with the sweet, yeasty promise of baking bread left cooling nearby. It is a communal olfactory tapestry woven from dozens of individual necessary preparations. You walk perhaps 10 paces toward your own door, which stands slightly recessed, offering a small pocket of relative quiet. You look at the simple wooden latch and the heavy iron hinge, objects built with robust function rather than mere appearance. Their durability tells you everything you need to know about the prevailing philosophy here. Things must endure. Before entering, you take a moment to feel the accumulated calm wash over your shoulders. The day's minor irritations, the slight strain in your lower back from kneeling, the grit under your fingernails, are acknowledged but not amplified. They are simply facts of the lived experience. You remember the core understanding that keeps daily life running. Survival is built on methodical patience and absolute interdependence with immediate resources. The last remnants of daylight catch the dust motes floating in the still air, making them visible for a moment before they drift into shadow. It is a delicate, mesmerizing display, a brief reminder of matter existing suspended between visible states. You observe this quietly, taking note of the slow descent from visibility to obscurity. There is no drama in the transition, only gradual depletion. The energy that propelled you through the morning's tasks simply fades, giving way to a deep, anticipatory stillness that precedes the quiet meal and the deepening night. The air here shifts as you pull the wooden bucket up, a creak echoing in the cool pre-dawn quiet. It is a familiar sound, one that marks the measured pace of every working life near this community well. You feel the initial weight of the water immediately. It is substantial, denser than you expected, and perfectly cold against your palms, carrying with it the deep chill of the underground spring. Slowly, methodically, you drag the heavy rope across the worn stones, paying attention to how the fibers have frayed and smoothed over generations of repeated effort. The rough texture of the rope contrasts sharply with the slick, damp smoothness of the wellhead's lip, where countless hands have rested through dawn after dawn. You lift your gaze from the water's surface and take in the surrounding architecture. The well itself is built of massive stones, darkened by time and moisture, their surfaces bearing mossy patches that cling softly to the crevices, suggesting centuries of patient neglect alongside constant use. You run your fingers along a particularly deep groove near the rim, noting how the stone has softened slightly under the perpetual spray. It feels solid, unmoving against the fleeting nature of human activity, a silent, heavy monument to necessity. The cool dampness rises from the exposed stonework, mingling with the faint, earthy scent of disturbed soil and wet river clay. This smell is so fundamental that you almost forget it exists until it hits you, reminding you simply where you stand, at the source. The water itself carries more than just moisture. It carries the mineral tang of deep earth, a taste that speaks of rock strata and time passing through impermeable layers. As you steady the full bucket, balanced against your hip, you notice others beginning their own routines around the circle of well-drawn necessity. There is no rush, only the collective, hushed hum of purpose. A neighbor draws her own smaller container, moving with the practiced economy of someone who has executed this chore since childhood. Your eyes drift over the patterns forming in the wet cobblestones at your feet, small rivulets carrying away residual dirt and drips, marking where water has flowed fastest. The task requires a certain physical patience. You must manage the weight without strain, coordinating the pull of the rope with the balance needed to carry the load. This slow movement becomes meditative in itself. Each step toward the village is measured by the liquid slosh within the bucket, a gentle reassurance that your daily sustenance has been secured. Leaving the well and turning toward the cluster of dwellings, you feel the subtle shift in atmosphere. The immediate chill near the stone gives way to the slightly warmer air pockets trapped between houses, smelling faintly of smoke from overnight fires banked low in chimneys. You walk slowly now, letting your mind settle into the rhythm of simple conveyance. Lifting, pulling, carrying. It is a necessary circuit, this journey from the communal water source back to the quiet routine of the home. As you pass by an open doorway, catching a brief glimpse inside a domestic space, you can see objects arranged in patterns of daily use. Stacked wooden bowls waiting for morning food, woven mats laid out on damp dirt floors. The orderliness here speaks not of wealth, but of enduring routine and careful preparation for the day ahead. It is the geometry of survival. You set the heavy bucket down just inside your own threshold. The resulting dull thud reverberates slightly in the quiet space, marking the completion of a major physical undertaking. You stand back momentarily, letting your senses process the cool weight of what you have acquired. The water feels almost vital, sustaining and utterly indifferent to human endeavor. It simply is. The process now becomes one of distribution, the small acts of purifying this resource. You carry it further into the dwelling, toward a washing basin carved from local wood or perhaps just a low pile of stones. Here, the cold weight transitions from being a burden of transport to a tool for purification and cleansing. Your hands move deliberately, following an ingrained memory of how best to work the soap scraps with the abundant water. The temperature difference between the cool water and your skin is immediate, sending a slight shock up your forearms that quickly subsides into satisfying coolness. You lather your palms together, watching the suds accumulate, thick and creamy against the muted tones of the wooden basin. The smell changes here. The mineral scent of the well mixes with the sharper, almost acidic aroma of lye soap remnants. You rub slowly over your wrists, paying attention to the delicate bones beneath the skin, noticing how the cool flow helps ease any persistent ache from yesterday's labor. Each wash feels like a small erasure, scrubbing away not only the clinging dust and grit, but also the cumulative fatigue of time lived under an open sky. You think about this passage, the water as a medium for renewal, washing away the edges of sleep and minor weariness. Reflecting on the essential nature of this act, you consider how much effort is expended simply to achieve baseline cleanliness. It requires distance, physical strength, and time, resources that are themselves sometimes scarce or contested. The constant, silent value of this cool resource permeates everything. The simple pleasure of working hands feel clean against the rough texture of the wash basin wood. This necessity underlies the quiet comfort of your community life. You gather a second measure of water now, perhaps for washing tools or rinsing discarded scraps. You pay attention to how the water changes as it moves, first agitated and swirling with soap suds, then settling into its clear, indifferent state when poured onto the dirty stones outside. This visible change is a quiet lesson in physical states, the ease of going from chaos back to repose. The cool weight settles slightly within your core, a deep sense of groundedness accompanying it. The chore, repetitive and unremarkable to an outsider, feels profoundly significant in this moment. It links you physically and spiritually to the continuity of human existence. Every hand that has drawn water before you leaves its ghost impression upon the worn stone steps. You begin to move away from the basin, leaving the residue of clean effort behind. The first act of the day is done with a successful rhythm. The cool weight lifted, the necessary ritual performed. As your thoughts drift toward the next task, the gathering of bread and the smell of yeast yet to activate, you carry the lingering coolness of the water like a promise of sustained rhythm through the quiet pre-dawn awakening. You leave the cool, echoing dampness of the well, your hands still faintly scented with the fresh, earthy smell of drawn water. The weight of the bucket feels familiar now, a comforting anchor to the day's steady rhythm. You walk away from the central stone circle and toward the smaller, warmer corner where life's true sustenance is created. This path leads you past the washing area and towards the banked heat that signals the beginnings of domestic work. The air here shifts immediately. The damp chill gives way to a gentle, dry warmth carried on invisible currents. You find the hearth, or perhaps it is simply an adapted cooking stone in the corner of your shared dwelling, where embers glow with the muted promise of fire. There is no roaring blaze, merely that deep, sustained heat radiating outwards, painting the nearby stone mantelpiece with faint, smoky streaks. The smell is immediate and deeply familiar. The sweet, slightly sharp scent of slow-burning wood mixed with the mineral tang of cooled ash. You settle yourself near this source of warmth, letting the steady background buzz help to pull you into the pace of the morning. You observe the activity around the embers. A small fire, tended by someone whose movements are economical and practiced, keeps a low heat going for the day's necessary tasks. Nearby, perhaps on a wooden surface or even directly upon an upturned trough, sits a large mound of dough. It has been mixed already. Its pale yellowish color contrasts gently with the deep reds and blacks of the fire's remnants. This is not a moment of speed or panic, but one steeped in necessary slowness. The first task before you is to acknowledge this dough, to simply watch it rest, waiting for the yeast, that tiny, invisible life force, to begin its quiet work. The tactile sensation draws your attention next. You move toward the prepared surface where flowers are kept. They are not the fine, silky powders imagined in later centuries, but rustic grains, varied and textured. Some flowers are coarse from whole rye berries, others possess a paler dustiness from ground spelt. When you dip your hands into a measured portion of this flour, you feel the grit immediately, the slight irregularity that speaks to its milling by water wheel or foot treadle. You rub a little between your fingers, noting the subtle differences in weight and texture, the way one grain slides off differently than another. This awareness grounds you completely in the physical reality of your morning, reminding you that even basic sustenance is an act dependent on earth and human effort. You gather yourself near the dough. The process of kneading requires more than just muscle. It requires a kind of rhythmic patience, a steady insistence. Your hands sink into the slightly tacky mass. At first, the movement feels alien, demanding a coordination you haven't used in this way since childhood. You begin to push and fold, incorporating air back into the sticky network of gluten strands within the dough. The dough resists at first, cool and somewhat stubborn beneath your palms, but as you continue the measured, circular motions, it gradually softens and grows pliable under your continuous work. The sounds become incredibly intimate now. The soft, wet slapping sound of the dough against the wood, the steady rush of your own breathing matching the rhythm of your labor. There is no sudden climax to this process, only a persistent, meditative hum. You feel the faint drag of flour dust settling on your skin, mixing with sweat and the general accumulated grime of daily life, creating a unique scent that belongs solely to this morning's work. as you need. You are reminded of the profound effort that goes into every single element of existence here. The dough itself is simply water, grain, warmth, and time, all carefully combined by necessity. You pause your hands after folding the last section, allowing them to rest for a moment on the surface, still dusted with flour. Looking down at the mound now enriched by your effort, you see its subtle sheen, hinting at the latent structure waiting to emerge. The temperature in this small corner is wonderfully variable, the cool dampness from the well contrasting with the gentle radiating heat of the hearth embers, all surrounding the moderately warm mass of dough. This immediate sensory experience shifts into a deeper form of observation. You consider the purpose of fire. It is not just for cooking. It is for warmth, for signaling presence, and historically for preservation. The remnants of yesterday's ashes hold traces of smoke-cure wood, giving off that faint medicinal scent. You notice how the light, filtered through any nearby opening or vent hole, dances across the slightly rough texture of the stone walls. A dusty, uneven play of shadows emphasizing the permanence of these humble materials. The dough must now rest again, but this time, your focus shifts to the fuel that will transform it. You observe the wood stacked neatly nearby, perhaps bundled and ready for transport or careful feeding into the fire throughout the day. Each piece carries its own smell. Some are sharp from newly split oak, others are smoky and sweet from aged beechwood. You pick up a small stick, turning it over in your fingers. It is dry, light, and deceptively simple, yet vital to the whole sequence of life you are weaving through the day. The scent of yeast now becomes slightly more noticeable as time passes, and the residual warmth continues its work. This subtle aroma, a mild sweetness mixed with a faint tang of fermentation, is the quiet promise of transformation. You lean back slightly, letting the rhythmic feeling of your hands working earlier settle into a dull, satisfying ache in your palms. This physical sensation is a kind of small reward, a bodily confirmation that you have participated actively and productively in the continuation of life. The notion of sustenance becomes layered now. It is not just about the bread itself. It is about the labor required, the field that provided the grain, the water that softened the dough, the fire that will bake it, and the human hands that mixed and molded it. All these things intersect within this small radius. The hearth, the flour, the kneading board. You pick up a wooden peel or a simple baking basket, examining its worn wood grain. The surface tells tales of countless times standing directly in the heat. The stains are permanent records of past bakes, a faint caramelization on one corner, a darkening from spilled liquids along the edge. These objects do not just facilitate labor, they carry history, anchoring you firmly to this specific place and time. The reflection deepens into the necessary slowness of the entire cycle. There is no rushing this process. If the dough were rushed, it would collapse. If the fire were banked too low, it would fail to reach its peak heat. Everything here operates under a profound consideration for timing and texture. This mastery over slow processes, the rising yeast, the gradual burn of wood, the measured spread of flour, is itself a core skill of survival in this era. You wait then, simply observing the play of light on the surface of the rest dough. You watch how minute particles of dust suspended in the air drift downwards, caught momentarily by the faint drafts from the hearth. It is an exercise in profound stillness. The immediate focus remains intensely material. The grain, the heat, the sticky yielding substance waiting to be made solid and golden through fire. It feels less like a process and more like a gentle continuation of being. You are part of the rhythm, the breath that draws water, the muscle that kneads flour, the eye that watches the slow consumption of embers into useful heat. This continuous engagement with basic physical necessity serves as a profound quietude, replacing any dramatic event with an overwhelming sense of contained purpose and enduring continuity within the simple walls of your home. You continue to move forward, emerging from the quiet coolness of your dwelling and into the narrow arteries of the town. The air, which had held the damp scent of charcoal and slumber just moments ago, now seems to have absorbed the day's nascent heat, carrying a faint mix of sweat and wood smoke that clings low to the cobblestones beneath your feet. You find yourself moving with an almost instinctive slowness, matching the unhurried pace of those already awake in their paths. The lanes are not designed for speed. They twist and turn and narrow significantly at times, forcing you into a kind of mindful compression. Here, every footfall seems to settle deeper into the ingrained rhythm of centuries. You lift your gaze slightly from the damp cobblestones to observe the upper architecture. The overhangs, the small tiled roofs pitched steeply against the sky. The buildings lean into one another as if for mutual support, their materials speaking of enduring necessity. Packed earth mixed with stone, wood beams stacked upon weathered beam. As you pass through the mouths of these lanes, you begin to notice the soundscape slowly blooming into focus. It is not a sudden cacophony, but rather a layering, like the careful stacking of small ceramic plates. You hear the measured cadence of sounds that define daily life here, the light rhythmic thud and scrape of wooden cartwheels on stone, the higher, more sporadic clatter of metal, perhaps tools being carried to work, or perhaps just the jingle of beads from a merchant's stall. These sounds are constant anchors, defining the edges of your quiet journey. The air grows thicker with these overlapping noises and scents. There is the earthy smell of dung mixed lightly with ripe hay, suggesting the proximity of the livestock paths. Alongside that, you catch the sharp, clean tang of wood smoke from an open hearth, a different, smoky sweetness than the embers dying in your own chimney, this one suggesting a breakfast already well underway elsewhere. You watch a cluster of people passing nearby, a group perhaps heading toward the central square or market area. Their movements are economical and practiced. They do not stroll or dawdle, but move with the steady purpose of necessity. You observe how some carry woven baskets upon their arms, the weight of potential harvest or sold wares causing them to adopt a specific, balanced posture. It is here that you start truly noticing the interaction between people and place. The architecture itself dictates the rhythm of life. The small market squares are not grand plazas for contemplation, but practical junctures for transactions, designed more for flow and function than for lingering beauty. Each corner you pass marks a different point of human commerce or domestication. A child, perhaps slightly older than playing, darts through a patch of clearer light near the entrance to a small workshop. The sound of their worn leather shoe hitting the uneven cobbles is sharp against the backdrop of more muted sounds. You watch them for only a moment. They are chasing something unseen, a piece of discarded twine, maybe, or simply the momentary joy that belongs only to the fleeting now. Their laughter, though quiet, rings out with an untainted brightness that temporarily lifts the sensory weight of the passage. Further on, you encounter two neighbors passing slowly in opposite directions. They do not stop entirely, nor do they engage in lengthy conversation. Instead, there is a slight dip of the head and a brief exchange of small nods. This silent recognition, this acknowledgement of shared space and routine existence, feels profoundly meaningful. It speaks to a deep, ingrained understanding that these lives pass in close proximity for generations, requiring an unspoken protocol of minimal interaction. You slow your own pace almost imperceptibly as you move between these streams of life. You are not the focus. Rather, you are simply another element moving through a highly complex, overlapping environment. You notice the details of this shared passage, how deep the rut marks are in the ground where the carts have repeatedly passed, how worn smooth the stones near a perennial drain are from spilled water and mud, how many different colors of thread or natural dye seem to be staining the hems of the passing garments. The energy in the air is not one of excitement, but rather one of enduring resilience. Every sound, every scent, every slight upward tilt of a building suggests a life lived close to materials, close to the necessity of wood, stone, and the predictable cycles of sun and season. You feel yourself adjusting your own breathing to match this ambient pace, taking shallow breaths punctuated by the sounds around you. The faint creak of a heavy wooden door opening nearby, the soft thunk as something wet is set down on a low wooden ledge, or the occasional bleat of sheep penned just out of sight. The passage becomes a meditative immersion into collective routine. You realize that much of the noise and movement you are absorbing is not random accident. It is the highly predictable choreography of human necessity. The movements required to sell bread, draw water, or simply get from one sleeping patch to another. You find yourself appreciating the quiet intensity of this existence, where the loudest sounds often come from the most mundane activities. The rhythmic creak of a wheelbarrow passing by, or the splash of residual rainwater catching the early sun. This slow, collective unfolding is the true rhythm of your world today. The cool scent of earth and damp wood clings to your clothes as you settle into the quiet routine of the workshop. You are standing beside a large wooden vat, stained deep burgundy from previous batches of dye. The air here is thick, smelling distinctly of plant life that has been boiled down, a mixture of tannins, sweet roots, and something faintly mineral, like smoke mixed with wet moss. This scent defines the space, the necessary work of slow transformation. You pick up a handful of dried leaves, their edges brittle and dark against your fingertips. They are not clean enough to be pleasant, but they possess a deep, contained potential for color. The material nature of dyeing is inherently patient. It demands waiting. You begin by meticulously scraping bark from the roots collected earlier. The outer layer falls away in dusty flakes that settle softly onto the stone floor around your feet. Each flake must be considered. Some are suitable for grinding into fine powder to create pigments, while others will simply steep and release their tannins over time. This initial separation is painstaking work, requiring a deep focus on texture. You notice how surprisingly resilient the material life of these roots is. They appear dead, yet they carry within them the memory of vibrant forests, ready to surrender that stored color slowly into water's embrace. The scraping motion becomes a meditation in itself, the rhythmic rasping sound punctuated only by the occasional soft thump as a piece of wood hits the stone bench beside you. You gather your tools, mortars and pestles made of heavy, cool granite, woven baskets for collecting precise amounts of material, and lengths of sturdy cordage used to suspend delicate bundles. These tools are worn smooth in places where generations of hands have moved over them, a testament to their necessary persistence. You move toward the hearth corner, near a small basin reserved specifically for preparing dye baths. The wood smoke from the main dwelling nearby drifts into your workshop, carrying with it a ghost scent of burning bread and wood ash. It mixes subtly with the potent vegetal odors, creating the unique breath of this space. The first task is preparing the mordant, the material that helps the color adhere to the thread. You reach for crystalline salts and alum powder stored in ceramic jars. These materials look shockingly artificial compared to the organic matter around you. They are precise, measured, necessary chemical anchors. The grinding process is slow and deliberate. Using a small pestle, you crush the white, sharp crystals into a fine, uniform dust within a shallow stone dish. You watch how the powder catches the ambient light, filtering through the narrow window opening. It sparkles faintly, momentarily mimicking captured moonlight. This need for chemical precision contrasts sharply with the wild, unruly bounty of the plant matter surrounding you. It is this marriage of measured process and natural decay that defines your work. The scent changes slightly as the dust settles. Now there is a sharp, metallic tang mingling with the earthy sweetness of the roots. You spread out several skeins of undyed thread upon a wide wooden table. They are simple wool or linen, their texture yielding softly under your fingers. These threads represent potential, waiting for transformation. Some strands are thick and robust, destined perhaps for outer garments. Others are finer, intended for trim or linings. Each spool is counted, weighed in the mind's ledger, an inventory of future color palettes. You contemplate the patience this process requires. Dyeing is not fast. You immerse smaller amounts of processed plant matter into deep iron pots filled with drawn water that already carries the memory and mineral echo from the communal well days ago. The initial sight is unremarkable, just murky, lukewarm liquid filling the vat. Yet, you know what lies dormant within these roots and leaves. They hold centuries of biological chemistry waiting for activation by heat, time, and mineral interaction. As the pots begin to simmer over the low fire, releasing warm plumes of fragrant steam, you observe how the smoke curls and dances in the shaft of incoming sunlight. The rhythm slows almost to nothingness. Your breath deepens and smooths out with the slow rise and fall of the simmering liquid. You pick up a bundle of harvested berries, deep purple and slightly shriveled. They are not for immediate use. They must be dried further, pressed carefully between layers of linen cloth until their juice concentrates into an almost syrup-like paste. Handling them, you notice how cool and surprisingly dense they feel compared to the fragile dryness of the leaves. You sort through different types of material: bark from oak trees that stain deep brown, walnut husks that promise richer umbers, and meadow-sweet flowers that yield delicate greens. The careful layering continues. Some materials need minutes spent soaking. Others require hours over slow heat. The process is an academic study in natural chemistry, taught through repetitive action. You dip a section of thread into the initial bath, a preliminary soak to prepare the fiber. It takes time for the dye molecules, minute and insistent, to begin forming bonds with the keratin or cellulose structure of the wool. This soaking period emphasizes how deeply woven into the fabric life is. Nothing can be altered quickly here. You pause often just to examine the accumulated materials. The wooden floor around your station now holds a rich tapestry of discarded husks, spent leaves, and crushed wood, a colorful graveyard of necessary beginnings. Each piece was once vibrant in its own natural context, but here it has been stripped down to its pure coloring potential. You run a fingertip lightly along the rim of one of the simmering vats. The metal is warm beneath your touch, transferring a gentle, steady heat that seems comforting and constant. You consider the thread you are working on. It will not simply be colored. It will have been metabolized by natural processes, slowed down by patience, anchored by mineral aid. It is a labor of sustained anticipation. Observing the way the steam rises from the deepest bath reminds you of the cyclical nature of life in this community. Beginnings, the fresh cuttings, meet enduring transformation, the long simmer, and this process creates something lasting, beautiful pigment. Sometimes, when the air is perfectly still, You can hear the faint sounds of life continuing just beyond your workshop walls. A distant clatter of wood against stone from another home, the lowing call of cattle moving in a nearby field. These sounds are peripheral and steady, marking the continued passage of time, even while your own focus remains locked inside the deep, chemical quietude of the dye process. You check on the temperature again, adjusting the banked embers beneath the pots with a small wooden poker. The heat must be consistent, enough to coax the color out without burning away its vital essence. This careful management of fire and patience embodies the entire philosophy of your craft. You rest for a moment, allowing your eyes to adjust to the specific quality of light that penetrates the workshop window. A diffused gold that catches the airborne dust motes drifting up from the bubbling vats. The task is less about visible action now than it is about deep, sustained waiting and highly detailed observation. You watch the water surface. Sometimes a bubble will rise through the roots, momentarily distorting the reflection of the smoky rafters above. This gentle movement holds your attention completely. It teaches you that true change, the kind that yields depth and lasting quality, never happens in a rush. It is slow, inevitable, and utterly reliant upon allowing things the time to interact with one another. The tannin, the mordant, the fiber, the mineral-rich water. This quiet waiting becomes your most necessary skill, a way of existing attuned to natural rhythms rather than human impatience. The midday light, though filtered by the overhang of eaves and dusty lintels, still carries a certain weight. It illuminates dust motes dancing in the stillness between people, a golden curtain moving lazily through the air. You find yourself settled at a rough-hewn wooden table, positioned where the shadow from the adjacent building is just beginning to ease away, allowing the light to settle evenly across the worn surface. This is the time of shared sustenance, the rhythm of simply existing together after the morning's work has gathered into its necessary completion. The table itself speaks of countless similar moments. The grain of the wood is softened by decades of elbow contact and heat transfer from the bowls placed upon it. You watch how light catches the scratches, not marks of neglect, but rather tiny records of lives lived in close proximity. As you sit down, the simple weight of your own presence seems to anchor you slightly into the structure, making the ground feel solid beneath the accumulated history of countless meals. The food placed before you is elemental. Simple loaves of bread, slightly dusted with flour that catches the light like pale sugar, and bowls containing vegetables taken from nearby plots or exchanged in bartering piles. There are greens, perhaps boiled cabbage leaves, and roots whose skins still retain a dull, earthen purple hue. The preparation required for this meal has been quiet and efficient. Nothing is wasted. Every peel, every scrap of leaf finds its necessary use. You begin by gently picking up your portion of greens. The coolness of them gives way almost immediately to the ambient warmth of the shared room. You scrape a bit of remaining residue onto the large wooden platter before you, a functional sweep that requires no conscious thought. This small, repetitive motion is deeply grounding. It speaks of necessity and resourcefulness. As you eat, the focus remains less on the flavors, which are subtle, earthy, and familiar, and more on the observed patterns of others around you. You watch how your neighbors approach their food. One woman meticulously peels the papery skins from a gourd that was too large to carry easily, her fingers moving with an economy of motion practiced over years. Another man tears at a chunk of bread, testing its texture against his thumb before taking a small bite. The soundscape is dominated by these unhurried acts. The gentle scraping of a spoon against earthenware, the muted crunch as someone chews tough greens, and the soft thwap of skin being peeled away from something moist. These sounds do not demand attention. They simply exist, forming the ambient tapestry of midday quietude. The air itself holds a complex mix of smells. There is the foundational scent of wood smoke, a persistent sweetness that seems to cling to clothing and stone, mixed with the sharper, green smell of cooked vegetables and the mineral tang that rises from the earthenware pots cooling nearby. It is a confluence of labor and domestication. You feel the presence of companionship around you, but it is not marked by grand conversation or dramatic exchange. Instead, it manifests in quiet proximity, the shared breath drawn over similar consumption, the mutual awareness of space occupied at the table edge. This slow company is an immense form of sustenance in itself. There is a passing reflection on time here, visible only through this routine. Time does not rush toward you. Rather, it seems to fold around these simple actions, the breaking bread, the chewing greens, the sharing space. It takes on a thick, viscous quality, marked by small pauses and gentle shifts of focus. When the initial flurry of eating begins to slow, the collective attention turns outward, though not with curiosity, but with mild observation. You notice patterns in the skin creases around an elder's eyes as they look toward the light source, the way a child resting nearby chews on a piece of straw, seemingly more for the habit than any need. The quiet companionship suggests a profound reliability. You are part of this steady circle. The rhythm of life here dictates that sustenance is communal, and thus, observation must also be communal. It requires a shared economy of attention. As you finish your plate, the task shifts from pure consumption to lingering awareness. You notice the accumulated remnants on the rough wooden boards, the slight stickiness where oil or broth had been poured, the minuscule smears of color from root vegetables. These mundane artifacts are tangible proof of the labor just completed, evidence of continuity. The conversation, when it arrives, is not a lively exchange, but rather an accretion of facts. A discussion about how dry the riverbed was yesterday, a gentle query regarding the coming rain, a simple acknowledgement that the harvest on the southern field seemed promising. These conversational anchors ground you in your specific place and time. You rest your hand momentarily on the wood, feeling its coolness through the lingering warmth of the meal. The sensation is one of satisfying completion, an understated satisfaction drawn from having maintained the necessary physical rhythms. The effort invested yielded something tangible, sustaining both body and routine. The profound realization that surfaces gently in this period of slow company is how deeply intertwined survival is with shared existence. Every simple act, from scraping the last leaf to sharing a single loaf, acknowledges the presence and necessity of another life nearby. It is a silent affirmation of belonging that requires no verbal fanfare, only quiet awareness. The heat of the sun on your back is a gentle, steady thing. You have wandered away from the center of the village and found yourself at the edge of the land, where the cultivated ground gives way to rougher pasture, and finally to the bank that slopes down toward the water. A stream. It seems small, perhaps less significant than the great river you hear spoken of in distant towns, but right here, it is everything. You pause your steps at the top of the bank, letting the sound wash over you before you even look closely at what causes it. The initial sound is a consistent murmur, a low, persistent whisper that speaks only of motion and gravity. It draws you down, gently, toward its edge. The air here feels different than in the village lanes. There is a cooler dampness clinging to the grass and stones, scented with wild mint and wet earth. You lower yourself slowly to a spot where the ground has leveled out near the bank's edge. The surface beneath your shoes gives slightly underfoot. It is soft mud mixed with packed gravel. You look across the water, noticing how the light interacts with the current. It is not a still sheet of glass, but something constantly in argument with itself, the effort to remain calm against the forces pushing it along. The stream moves over a variety of stones, some large and dark, others small and tumbled smooth by repeated passing. You watch them as they are moved. The water does not rush, nor does it slacken entirely. There is an even, persistent energy underlying its flow. It seems to carry the weight of time itself, wearing down corners and smoothing edges through sheer, continuous passage. You settle yourself cross-legged on a patch of slightly higher ground near the bank's edge, close enough that you can feel the steady coolness radiating up from the wet soil. You do not reach for anything. You simply observe. Your attention is drawn to the texture of the water itself, how it catches glimmers of sunlight, and then immediately loses them in deeper pockets between stones. This surface movement suggests a kind of endless, low-stakes labor. Small fish flit near the shallows, darting with sudden, disciplined movements just beneath where your eyes rest. They move as if following currents you cannot fully track, a pattern of avoidance and necessity. You notice that their paths often curve slightly, not in grand arcs, but in minute adjustments dictated by the smallest dip or shadow on the stream bed. It is a perfect demonstration of living within constraints. You let your gaze wander over the stones beneath the waterline. Some are covered completely in a delicate green film, algae, perhaps, which suggests they remain wet and undisturbed for long periods. Other stones look freshly disturbed, having just been scoured by a noticeable surge. This variation speaks to the rhythm of forces, sometimes gentle decay, sometimes abrupt power. The slow pace of your breathing seems to synchronize with the stream's murmur. You become aware of the tiny sounds that accompany the main flow, the faint drip from hanging ivy roots, the little splash when a pebble, kicked by an unseen foot or nudged by a strong current, falls into the deeper run, the rustle of water against the bankside reeds. It feels like this stream has been here since long before the town was built. It predates the lanes, the ovens, and even the memory of the folk who live nearby. Its existence is utterly indifferent to human need or complexity. It simply flows because it must, drawn downward by a gentle slope over geological time. You consider how that indifference contrasts with the structured life you just left behind. The rhythm in the town, the waking, the kneading, the market calls, the measured gathering for dinner, is built on intention and necessary effort. Every sound has a source, every action aims toward some goal. Full stomach, clean clothes, completed task. Here, there is no discernible aim beyond the path of least resistance. The water moves over objects without concern for their permanence. A worn wooden tool dropped into the current would eventually be softened and smoothed by its abrasive touch. A small river-eroded stone would lose any sharp edge it possessed through sheer friction. Your body remains motionless, yet your mind is tracing patterns in the ceaseless movement of the water. You track how a ripple, cast perhaps by a passing insect or a larger piece of detritus, expands outward, diminishing and resolving itself back into the generalized hum of the current. The immediate disruption quickly vanishes into the greater whole. This stream teaches an unburdening lesson. Much of life here, in this small corner of history, revolves around things that must be fixed or managed. The harvest, the roof beams, the social order. But the water reminds you of a deeper mechanism, one that operates regardless of human schedule or toil. It is simply going somewhere, endlessly. You lift your hand and dip it into the cool flow. The temperature is startlingly lower than the air suggests, carrying with it the cold bite of constant movement. You let your fingers rest in the water for a moment, feeling the minor vibrations passing through the wet skin. It washes away not just the dust of the morning road, but the sharper edges of preoccupation. The bank here is muddy and yielding, encouraging you to sit comfortably and remain absorbed. You watch an item, perhaps a piece of brightly colored litter lost from upstream, being caught in the movement, held briefly by debris or a slight eddy, before being swept onward, out of sight, until it becomes part of some other current's path. You realize that the constant necessity of purifying water does not require perfect cleanliness. It only requires proximity to the continuous journey. The stream is dirty with leaf litter and grit, yes, but its inherent quality is defined by its tireless movement. This thought lingers, quiet and unstated, like the subtle scent of wet river moss. The sun climbs higher now, bathing the scene in a warmer, less diffused light than the morning provided. You remain for a little longer, allowing the low murmur to become your private, steady rhythm. It is an anchor point, reminding you that even the most structured routine is ultimately subject to forces, to earth, to gravity, and to the ceaseless flow of water passing over everything left behind. The afternoon light, now a softened amber, begins to slope across the earthen floor. It does not arrive suddenly. Rather, it seems to leak into the small space by degrees, making the dust motes suspended in the air glow with a quiet, golden radiance. You find yourself settled near the corner of your dwelling, the angle allowing you to take in both the worn patterns of the stone walls and the steady rhythm of life moving just outside. A comfortable stillness settles over the immediate area, broken only by the distant, almost imperceptible clatter of something being dragged across cobblestones. The sound is muffled, absorbed by the buildings built so close together. You look down at your hands, noticing the fine grit of earth still clinging beneath the nails, a residue of the morning's labor and the persistent closeness of life to the ground. They are competent hands. They know the difference between damp clay and sun-baked loam. They hold the subtle ache of predictable work. This day's pattern, the cold water from the well, the warmth of the fresh bread, the scraping at the dye roots, has laid a quiet order over you. An older person, perhaps a relative or just a neighbor with deep local knowledge, sits nearby on a low bench crafted from rough-hewn timber. They are not telling an exciting story. They are merely watching the way the light shifts across your knees, observing the dust motes, breathing in time with the slow decline of afternoon heat. Their presence is one of quiet authority, derived entirely from accumulated observation. You shift slightly, a movement causing only a faint scuffle of woven straw against dried grasses. You find yourself listening not to what is said, but to the lack of urgency in their voice, and consequently in your own mind. There is a specific quality to knowledge here. It is weighty, like dry river stones stacked carelessly. It requires careful handling and slow sorting. The focus settles naturally upon the medicinal qualities of the local flora. You notice a clump of weeds growing stubbornly out of a crack in the mortar, their leaves a vivid, almost shocking green against the muted tones of the stone. The elder makes a soft gesture toward them. They do not explain anything dramatically, they merely point and let you observe. By watching how closely the small veins are etched into the leaf surface, by noting the slightly bitter smell released when a gentle breeze brushes past, the inherent purpose begins to unfold. You recall having heard of certain ailments, the persistent cough that seems to settle deep in the chest, or the fever that racks the body through the night. These concerns are immediate and visceral. You know that remedies, historically, were often mixtures of observation and guesswork, heavily reliant on what the local environment provided. Every plant had a use, whether for wrapping, boiling, or simply chewing to soothe an ache. The weight of knowing these simple properties, which root eased stomach pains after a meal too rich, which leaf cooled inflammation on a fevered brow, which bark could bind bleeding wounds, is immense. It is not knowledge gained through the written scrolls held by men in distant cities, but rather through decades of persistent interaction with the cyclical nature of life itself. You realize that the most reliable texts were sometimes the earth and the leaves themselves. Your attention drifts across a small pile of brittle-looking herbs gathered earlier. Some leaves are bruised from handling, others retain their vibrant structure. The elder finger's one specific type, its scent sharp and slightly peppery. They describe not what it cures directly, but how it tastes to remedy the stomach's discomfort. A taste that is clean, earthy, undeniably rooted in this particular patch of soil. You begin to understand the depth of this simple knowledge. It demands patience far beyond waiting for a dye bath to set. It requires meticulous observation of seasonal changes, the cycles of growth and decay, the slight differences between similarly colored weeds. One must know which variation of dock leaf provides a gentle laxative and which variety offers merely a mild stain. The line between remedy and simple poison can be incredibly fine. This expertise is not heralded or taught in grand lessons. It settles into the bones like memory. It emerges from routine, from watching what happens when you treat an injury with this particular poultice, or noticing that after a rainstorm, certain fungal blooms appear which might signal a change in seasonal diet. Your mind naturally begins to catalog these observations, linking observed reality directly to practical outcome. There is a subtle humor woven into this necessity of knowing, the profound seriousness attached to recognizing the difference between two almost identical-looking stalks of grass. The sheer volume of small details that must be maintained simply to ensure continuation, to keep people well enough to work tomorrow, and therefore have bread on the table. You look back at the corner where the weeds grow in the mortar crack. They seem less like wild growth now, and more like an archive, a silent library written in chlorophyll and earth minerals. The knowledge they hold is entirely local, utterly perishable if the environment changes significantly, yet completely necessary for survival within this specific valley, under this particular sky. The deep satisfaction here is quiet. It does not come from victory or discovery, but from knowing one's place in a predictable rhythm, the cycle of sowing and reaping, of minor sickness and recovery. You feel the reassuring comfort of limitations. You know what your world can provide because you have spent time observing what it withheld and what it freely offered. The light continues to soften, pushing the shadows into longer, more definitive shapes. The afternoon's lesson is not about grand theories or great inventions, but about the simple, dependable power of noticing things, the subtle discoloration on a stone that marks how long it has been rained upon, the way an ordinary beetle moves through dry dust. These small truths form the foundation of all survival in this place. You absorb the weight of these quiet lessons, integrating them into the deep reservoir of your own lived experience, preparing yourself for the slow descent into the routine peace of the early evening. The light is beginning to soften now, shifting from the bright warmth of midday to a more muted, honeyed hue. You notice this change not with alarm, but with a quiet recognition that another segment of the day is drawing toward its close. The labor of the morning and early afternoon seems to gather itself into the air, settling like dust motes in the slant light filtering through the small openings of your dwelling. A deep breath feels necessary, pulling in the mixed scents of the day. Faint smoke mixed with the sharper tang of sweat from the courtyard, underlined by the cool, earthy smell that always accompanies the late afternoon. You walk slowly toward the corner where the necessities for the evening will be gathered. There is no rush to this task. Every movement seems dictated by the softening quality of the light itself. The first thing you attend to might be the tools used today. They rest near the hearth or along a worn wooden bench, artifacts of yesterday's necessary efforts. You pick up a simple spade or perhaps a basket woven from local reeds. The wood grain feels rough and dry beneath your fingers, bearing the subtle patina of countless hands before yours. It is heavy in your grip, not with strain, but with an undeniable sense of accumulated use. You take a cloth, perhaps simply scraps that once belonged to someone else, and begin wiping away the ingrained dirt. You notice how the grime mixes with the dampness of the wipe, creating a dark, oily residue on the cloth itself. As you work, your mind begins to slow down, mimicking the diminishing energy in the light. Cleaning is not merely about removing grit, it is a form of making space. You examine the sharp edge of a chopping knife, noting how time has dulled its perfect symmetry into a reliable working curve. This simple act reminds you that even things designed for precision submit slowly to the steady passage of air and use. You set aside these tools carefully, placing them on their designated spot, a ritualistic placement that signals the formal end of work hours. You move toward the corner dedicated to storing fuel. Wood is gathered from various places: fallen limbs, split logs, scraps saved from the village perimeter. The wood itself offers different textures and temperatures. Some pieces are rough bark still clinging to them, while others are smooth and blackened by earlier flames. You gather these materials, mindful of their size and weight. There is a distinct satisfaction in organizing them, stacking them so that the largest logs bear the weight upon smaller kindling. This method requires forethought, predicting the heat needed tomorrow, or perhaps even the specific type of smoke desired for cooking. As you handle the brittle wood, you observe the way the late afternoon sun catches the resin weeping from a fresh cut on a limb. It looks almost amber in the failing light. You realize how interconnected these small acts are. The tools that fed your day's needs, the fuel that will keep warmth when the night is cold, the careful order you restore to this small domestic corner. There is an embedded geometry to survival here, a practical, quiet mathematics based entirely on material management and predictable human rhythm. The task now shifts to bedding or household textiles. You gather the rough woolen blankets, or perhaps mend a tear in a linen cloth. If mending, your fingers learn the dance of needle and thread, a repetitive motion that requires singular focus. The worn fibers feel slightly gritty against your skin. When you pass the needle through the damaged weave, you are not just tying material together. You are physically linking one passing day to the next. You must pull the thread taut enough for the bond to hold, but gently enough not to snap the already fragile structure. This repetitive action settles a rhythm deep within your breathing. Inhale as the pattern begins, exhale as it completes. It is an anchor against the unpredictable nature of time, the harvest failing or the river shifting its course. You focus on the consistent pull of the thread, finding a kind of meditative permanence in this small craft. The world outside continues to settle into dusk. You can hear the muted sounds now, the distant call of livestock being led home, the faint, intermittent clang from a neighbor's kitchen as cooking fires are damped down. You eventually move toward the areas needing clearing and preparation for rest. This might involve raking dry straw into neat piles or sweeping accumulated dust from the earthen floor that has been disturbed throughout the day's activity. The broom bristles against the packed earth, raising fine plumes of ochre-colored powder that hang suspended in the deepening light. You watch these particles float down, accepting their slow descent back to the cool ground. The smell changes as you sweep, the sharp scent of dust mixing with the cooling, residual wood smoke. It is a complicated mixture, representing the full cycle of human activity, the residue of life lived fully within these walls. There is a profound sense of gratitude for this exhausting continuity, not in the grand or dramatic sense, but in the quiet knowledge that everything remains exactly where it should be, just slightly rearranged by your efforts. The preparation itself becomes an argument against chaos. You are organizing energy, the physical fuel and the material comforts, for the hours when natural darkness will impose its full reign. Every stack of wood is a potential warmth. Every mended cloth represents postponed loss. Every organized tool suggests readiness for tomorrow's demands. It is a slow, steady accumulation of order against the tide of oblivion. As you complete your circuit, standing back amidst the softly ordered domestic scene, the stacked logs, the neatly folded linens, the cleaned implements, you feel the deep calm that comes from completing necessary work. The day's routines have been acknowledged and tended to. You stand still for a long moment, simply allowing the last vestiges of light to wash over the textures around you. The matte finish of the stone hearth, the dull gleam on the polished wood handle, the soft nap of the woven matting on the floor. This stillness is itself preparation, a quiet centering before the final descent into night. You are ready to pass through the transition from labor to repose, having honored the enduring rhythms of this simple life. The last remnants of the working day seem to settle on your shoulders, a sort of comfortable, dusty weight. You find yourself moving toward the common edges, the places where walls soften into open space, and the scent of many lives gathers together as dusk approaches. The air is noticeably different now from the bright clarity of midday, losing its heat and taking on the cool dampness that promises the deep chill of night. A gentle breeze picks up, carrying scents, not just one smell, but a layered drift, the smoky sweetness of wood that has burned low in hearths all afternoon, mixed with the sharper, cleaner scent of damp stone and cooling earth. These aromas are simply part of the setting settling down for the evening. You walk slowly, your pace unhurried by any destination other than simply being present within this changing moment. You notice how the light has changed. The high, direct glare of the sun is gone, replaced by a diffuse, muted quality that casts long, gentle shadows from doorways and eaves. It seems to soften every edge, making the rough texture of the local stone seem almost velvety in its twilight glow. Your eyes adjust gradually, taking in details you had missed when the day was vibrant. The common pathways are starting to gather people. They do not stream or hurry. They drift into place, a slow gathering like smoke curling from many chimneys. People move with the practiced ease of those whose routines have etched themselves deep into their bones. Neighbors meeting at the threshold, merchants preparing their small stalls for the evening calm, children drifting quietly near the edge of playfulness. You pause near one such threshold, standing where the worn flagstones meet the rough-hewn dirt path. The boundary itself is noteworthy. It marks a clear separation between the private warmth contained within walls and the shared openness of the community outside. It is here that all these different energies, the smoky life inside, the cooling space outside, meet and merge. The air temperature drops with an almost palpable weightiness. You draw a deep breath, feeling the cooler moisture fill your lungs. This coolness penetrates through your clothing and settles into your skin, a reminder of nature's constant schedule regardless of human schedules. The soundscape shifts too. The calls and clatter of labor are fading out, replaced by quieter noises, the occasional rhythmic scrape as someone sweeps a yard, the soft murmur of low voices talking in shared rhythm, the steady, almost imperceptible chirping chorus of unseen insects beginning their nightly performance. You find yourself observing the hands of others, the way they move when preparing to sit down, a settling motion, adjusting weight against familiar surfaces. These hands, which worked earlier drawing water or kneading dough, now rest in thoughtful stillness on a railing or draped across a wooden bench. There is a profound sense of physical completion etched into their stillness. Look at the architecture around you. The simple dwellings are built from local materials, heavy timbers and mortared stone. You note how skilled craftsmanship is evident in the simplicity of things. Joinery that requires no nails, roofs angled to shed the expected moisture, and small window openings designed more for ventilation than grand views. These buildings feel deeply connected to their specific place, seemingly grown out of the earth they rest upon. As you stand quietly within this settling scene, a thought drifts through your mind about time itself. It does not pass here in the dramatic rush of great historical moments recorded on scrolls and tablets. It moves instead with the consistent, reliable drag of gravity, like water flowing slowly from one level to the next. Life is defined by these predictable transitions, the shift from morning wakefulness to midday industry, and now, finally, this gentle movement towards evening repose. The shared air feels heavy with history, too, not a dramatic history, but the thick sedimentation of countless identical evenings passed before you. Every stone under your foot, every creak in the wooden planks, holds the quiet residue of meals eaten, conversations held, and tired bodies resting when all was exactly like this. You notice the subtle flickerings of light beginning to appear, small points of orange glow emanating from deep within windows, signals that families are gathering their meager comforts. These artificial lights contrast with the fading natural light outside, a perfect metaphor for how human energy shifts inward as the day draws its last breaths. It is a protective withdrawal into shared, immediate warmth. The pace here suggests a quiet acknowledgement of sufficiency. There is no panic about the coming night, merely the routine acceptance of it. People gather not out of necessity alone, but because proximity itself offers a measure of security. To be near others at this moment is to confirm that the rhythm of community continues, enduring whatever the darkness may bring. The scents intensify as people settle. The distinct, delicious smell of evening cooking begins to rise, slowly simmering herbs and grains mixed with the residue smoke that clings stubbornly to everything. It smells nourishing, both for the body and for the spirit. You might observe a small pile of dry kindling near a house entrance. It waits patiently, ready to receive the focused attention of the coming hours. The care taken in gathering these materials speaks volumes about careful foresight, the necessity of preparation that is always quiet, never dramatic. The collective breath of this community seems slower than your own. It is an unforced exhale after the day's accumulated effort. You feel the urge to match it, to slow your internal rhythm until you are merely another element in the settling pattern of dusk. The air in the small room is growing cool now, a gentle chill that seems to creep up from the packed earth floor and settle lightly on your skin. A low light flickers from the single oil lamp placed near the center of the room. It casts long, shifting shadows against the rough plaster walls, painting patterns that dance slightly with every subtle breath drawn within the dwelling. You find a spot on the simple wooden bench, settling down as others take their places, gathering close in the familiar intimacy of shared space after the day's labor. The first movements are slow, deliberate. The sounds that dominate are not those of speech yet, but the gentle scraping of wood against wood, the subtle rustle of thick wool cloth settling over seated bodies, and the low murmur that signals people are beginning to settle into the evening quiet. You notice the scent immediately, a rich blend of smoke, the lingering aroma from the hearth, perhaps mixed with some more recently kindled candles or lamps, and the earthy smell of cooling sweat, mingling with the stronger, sharper scents of drying herbs and cooking wood. These smells weave together to create the unique perfume of settled lives. Around you, simple earthenware bowls are being set upon low wooden tables. The ceramic pieces bear stains from countless meals past, a patina of use that tells silent stories. As others begin to pour out prepared evening rations, stews thickened with slow-cooked vegetables, or perhaps simple porridges, you observe the consistency of the food and the way it seems designed for sustained warmth rather than flavor intensity. You remember the labor involved in those ingredients, the hours spent tending a patch of beans, the careful scrubbing of roots, the slow drip of oil used to keep lamps lit. The true pace here is defined by anticipation, the quiet period just before eating, when conversation gathers itself like smoke before it dissipates entirely. You watch the hands around you. They are rough and marked with life's history, bearing calluses from tools, dirt from fields, and the faint redness of constant washing. Each hand tells a story of necessity and usefulness. You feel the collective exhaustion in those joints, an underlying weariness that is not pain, but simply the accumulated toll of routine living. As you prepare to eat, the first sounds start, the soft clink of wooden spoons against ceramic bowls. The process itself is unhurried. Everyone eats methodically, taking care with the meager rations as if they were weighted more heavily than their true value suggests. You observe the small rituals surrounding the meal, lifting a piece of bread by its corner edge, breaking off a chunk of tough root vegetable, or dipping a crust into a thick broth. These acts are almost meditative in their simplicity. The conversation begins softly, like embers glowing beneath ash. It is not marked by sudden laughter or dramatic pronouncements, but rather by low, measured tones, the sound of close voices finding comfort in familiar acoustics. You catch fragments of speech, mentions of the unusually persistent rain earlier in the week, a calculation regarding the weight and price of grain purchased from the market, or perhaps an amusing detail about someone's slight stumble near the communal well that afternoon. The stories exchanged are rarely tales of great heroism. Instead, they circle around the edges of daily life. The successful harvest yield reported by a neighboring farm, the difficult negotiation with a local official, the oddity of a wild bird seen over the river at dawn. These small observations about the world provide the framework for connection and meaning. They are anchors that tether you to your immediate community and to the continuous flow of time. During these quiet exchanges, notice how the lamplight changes your perception of detail. The faces around you are softly illuminated from below by the warm glow, deepening the lines beneath their eyes, highlighting the curve of a cheekbone worn smooth by time. You see the careful stitching on simple tunics, or the way someone has braided their hair back tightly to keep it out of the oil lamp's reach. These small details affirm the depth of settled life, lives lived within the consistent boundaries of stone and timber. The weight of shared stories, you realize, is not found in their entertainment value, but in their sheer act of continuity. By recounting what happened yesterday, or remembering an amusing struggle at the well, or predicting the coming rain, you are collectively reinforcing your place within a continuous sequence of events. You are reminding yourselves that this pattern, the struggle, the sustenance, the rest, is solid and enduring. You find yourself listening to a neighbor recount how they managed to save some particularly tough cabbages from market spoilage by storing them in cool earth pits. The advice is practical, deeply ingrained in local wisdom, something that requires generations of failure and subsequent adaptation to pass along. This knowledge, shared over simple food and lamplight, is far more valuable than any passing fancy or distant theory. The conversation then might drift toward the mundane quality of the season, the way the leaves have settled from their bright autumn hues into a deep, muted ochre, clinging stubbornly to branches still wet with morning dew. You notice that even in the discussion of nature's cycles, there is an unstated understanding. Everything changes slowly, and change must be managed with patience and careful timing. The air shifts again as you finish eating. The small dishes are scraped clean, left upon the wooden planks for washing later, their empty surface reflecting the flickering lamplight momentarily. There is a deep, satisfying quiet that follows, different from the silence of exhaustion. It is a quiet born of satiation and shared peace. You settle back against the bench, allowing your senses to absorb the residual warmth, the faint heat radiating from the hearth, the coolness remaining in the air where the lamplight struggles to push back the encroaching dusk. The physical act of sharing food transforms into the emotional nourishment of shared history. You feel the deep, quiet settling over you, a comforting weight that speaks not of loss or change, but of the persistent, dependable rhythm of human connection under an unchanging sky. This shared, humble meal solidifies the bonds woven by daily necessity, allowing the accumulated wisdom and the stories of survival to become your deepest form of sustained nourishment. The warmth of the day has seeped out of the stone walls, leaving behind a cool residue that settles on your skin. You have finished the low murmur of shared stories, and now the rhythm slows further still. All movement seems deliberate, softened by the deep settling into evening routine. The smells inside the dwelling are layered. The faint, sweet smell of old wool mixed with banked wood smoke, underlaid by the earthy scent of cooling mud on the outer floor. You find yourself settling into a corner seat, a spot where the window opening offers the best view of the receding twilight sky. You do not immediately look outside. Instead, you let your eyes adjust to the low ambient light, noticing how it skims across the uneven surfaces around you. The worn grain of the wooden bench beneath you feels cool and faintly dusty against your thighs. Your breath moves at a slow, even pace, matching the quiet rhythm established by everyone else in the room. The hushed movements, the careful folding of cloth, the distant creak of wood settling. The window opening is not large. It is more like a purposeful gap cut through the thick wall, designed perhaps more for ventilation than for expansive views. Through this narrow aperture, you can see beyond the immediate perimeter of your home. The transition from the enclosed warmth to the coolness of the night air feels palpable, a minor change in pressure that draws attention outward. Peering through this gap, you watch the gradual deepening of the sky. It is not the sudden blackness of deepest midnight, but rather a deep indigo blue, like faded river water just before dawn. The color absorbs the last vestiges of day's scattered light, gathering it into shades you might never see again. Above, the high canopy of trees near the edge of the settlement remains silhouetted against this deepening hue. The dominant feature of your view is not the sky itself, but the smoke that has drifted up from neighboring hearths. These plumes are gentle and lazy, weaving upward in unpredictable patterns. Some rise straight and resolute, like painted white strokes, while others catch a slight evening breeze and trail out into soft, grayish wisps. You find yourself watching how these trails of banked wood smoke interact with the emerging deep blue backdrop. The contrast is striking. the ephemeral, drifting smoke against the immense permanence of the celestial background. It forces your gaze upward, past the immediate concerns of dinner and communal safety, toward something much larger. The movement of the smoke appears so strangely alive, yet entirely passive. Each plume rises because it was created by human hands, by burning wood to keep warmth close. Yet its journey into the air is governed only by the temperature difference between the dwelling and the vast, cool expanse outside. It moves according to physics that are completely indifferent to your current worries or needs. You focus on a particular smoke trail, watching it climb until it seems to hesitate, suspended momentarily against a gathering patch of high cloud. Then, as if remembering its task, it continues upward, dissolving slowly into the cooling air mass. This simple cycle, the generation, the ascent, the dispersal, becomes remarkably hypnotic. Beyond the immediate smoke and neighboring roofs, you start to notice the emergence of stars. They are not brilliant explosions like in old tales, but gentle pinpricks of light, appearing with a stately slowness. The first visible stars seem to be clustered high above the ridge line, already settled into familiar patterns that have marked time for centuries. These tiny lights require no fanfare. They simply exist, repeating their slow ballet year after year. The smoke occasionally catches these emerging points of light, momentarily diffusing them before carrying them away again. This interplay, the transitory human effort, fire/smoke, against the enduring cosmic backdrop, stars, is what holds your attention completely. It is a sudden and vast shift in scale. You are reminded, perhaps for the first time that day, how localized and immediate most of your existence has been. The weight of the water bucket, the smell of the damp earth underfoot, the careful scrape of dough from the board. These were important things, necessary rhythms that kept you alive and anchored in community. The stars, however, pull you into a different kind of time, a time before the village was laid out, a time measured only by heavenly turns. You observe how even the smoke eventually reaches this same indifference. It cools, dissipates, and rejoins the vast breath of the night air. There is no complaint in the smoke, merely an inevitable ascent. The quiet contemplation settles over you, heavy and gentle like the cool weight of the stones beneath your feet. You realize that the purpose of watching the sky through the smoke gap is not to gain astronomical knowledge, but simply to allow your focus to detach from the small circle of human activity and connect with something immense and unhurried. This vastness has a peculiar quality. It does not inspire frantic hope or despair. It suggests continuity. It tells you that life will continue tomorrow in this very rhythm, the waking, the well, the bread, the smoke, and that when the day is done, the cycle of smoky plumes and distant stars will unfold regardless. You lift your gaze from the gap, allowing your vision to slowly adjust back to the subdued light within the room. The profound moment passes gently, leaving behind not a feeling of smallness, but a deepening sense of belonging to something larger than just the boundaries of the settlement wall. You draw a quiet breath, noticing the clean taste of cool air mixing with the lingering scent of your neighbors' hearths. The routine continues, but now it is viewed through the filter of deep, silent time, an observation that settles into the deepest part of your exhaustion, preparing you for the long and necessary darkness. You find yourself sinking deeper into the quiet of your small room. The evening light, which had been struggling through the village smoke outside, has now begun to fade entirely. You move slowly, deliberately, as if time itself is thickening the air around you. The exhaustion that settles upon you is not the soreness of heavy labor, but a deep, pervasive weight, the quiet fatigue that comes from simply existing within the dependable, unchanging rhythms of life here. Every action feels measured, imbued with the slow gravity of necessity. You notice first the lamplight. It has been doing its best work against the encroaching darkness, casting warm circles on the packed earth walls and making the already deep folds in your simple bedding appear richer in shadow. You reach out a hand to the small oil lamp, careful not to knock anything over. The glass chimney is cool beneath your fingers, retaining the faint heat of its long use. You lift the wick holder, steadying it until you can access the carefully reserved pile of spent rush wicks kept nearby. The task of extinguishing the flame seems surprisingly significant in this deep quiet. You gently cup your hands around the glass globe, and with a careful breath, lean closer to the soft, struggling fire. The final lick of orange light meets the slow, damp puff of air from your exhale, and it subsides into an immediate, comforting darkness. The smell of burnt wick and warm oil briefly replaces the deeper sense of night, the sharp tang of wood smoke mixing with the earthy musk rising from the packed dirt floor. You gather up the discarded wicks and place them carefully in a small, shallow iron basin near the hearth, noting how quickly even the residual glow of embers cools. The gentle process reminds you of the natural laws that govern this space. Every warmth must eventually dissipate. Every light must yield to shadow. There is a profound reassurance in this steady cycle. Next, your attention turns to the simple folding of materials. You approach the corner where your spare linens are stacked. A few worn woolen tunics and pieces of linen cloth used for wrapping wounds or cleaning surfaces. These fabrics have seen many cycles. They absorbed the moisture from the well basin. They shielded you from the morning dew, and now they will offer a soft covering against the chill of the coming night air. You pick up a piece of slightly damp linen. Its texture is unremarkable, yet it tells stories. The faint stiffness in the weave speaks of repeated washing in the communal trough. The softness near the hem suggests a point of frequent contact with skin. Running your hand over the cool, rough surface, you feel the accumulated weight of their use, the thousands of times they have been washed and folded by hands like yours. There is an inherent pattern here. Everything must be returned to order before rest can truly begin. The tools of the day, from the bread basket that needs scraping clean to the sturdy wooden bowl used for sharing food at supper, require a moment of methodical caretaking. You wipe down the surface with a scrap cloth dampened near the coals, observing how the dust settles immediately back into place, a reminder that nature always attempts to reclaim its own quiet order. You move toward your sleeping area. The bedding is already laid out, awaiting only your final adjustments. You smooth the woven rush mat on which you will rest your head, noticing the intricate patterns formed by years of use and wear. It is not a perfectly clean surface. Indeed, there are faint discolorations from spilled food and trampled dirt that mark its history. These imperfections do not detract from its function. Rather, they certify it as reliable. The silence now feels deep and comprehensive. It is different from the silence found at dawn, when the air was merely waiting to awaken. This is a stillness of settlement, a complete cessation of immediate need. You hear only the occasional sound that confirms life is ongoing nearby. Perhaps the soft clatter of a neighbor shifting weight in their own corner, or the gentle creak of oiled wood settling under temperature change. You settle into your final rhythm. Your movements become slower still, less pronounced, more absorbed into the structure of habit. You consider the passage of the hours, the arc from the faint pre-dawn chill through the steady blaze of midday heat, and culminating in this deep dusk quietude. It has been a complete immersion in necessary life. The reflection drifts back to the core realization. The rhythm of survival here is defined not by grand, dramatic events, but by these small acts, The extinguishing flame, the folding cloth, the careful cleaning of wood grain. These actions are themselves rituals that affirm continuity. They tether you to this place, moment by unchanging moment. You notice how your breath changes as the external world quiets. It becomes deeper, more measured, drawing in the cool, composite scent of night, the deep smell of cool earth mingling with the last remnants of wood smoke. This air is heavy and breathable, carrying the quiet promise that when morning comes again, these rhythms will simply resume. There is a certain physical weightlessness to falling into exhaustion here. It is not dramatic collapse, but a gradual surrender to peace. You close your eyes briefly, allowing the last faint image of the softly glowing hearth embers to fade behind your lids. The sense of deep time settles over you, the sheer depth of generations who have performed these identical actions in this very spot, under this exact night sky, relying only on simple continuity. You draw a slow breath, letting it out long and steady, watching for the last tendrils of smoke that drift up toward the unseen stars. The day's business is done, its small contributions absorbed into the necessary cycle. All that remains now is the deep, comforting embrace of shared rest, ready to wait for the silent rebirth